Call the March meeting for the Board for Licensing Contractors to order. Start with all beginning on my left.
Randy Chase, Nashville.
Reese Smith, Franklin.
Mark Brudd, Knoxville.
Jerry Hayes, Paris.
Keith Whittington, Johnson City.
Bill Mason, Greenbrier.
I'd like a motion to adopt the agenda.
So moved.
Second.
Second.
All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Ayes have it. Okay, we now have the hardships approved by the executive director.
These have all been approved by a board member, and they are posted on the website.
Move for approval.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to approve the hardships approved by the executive director. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Believe the ayes have it. Next, we have a board meeting transcript to review and approve.
We don't have that completed yet, so we'll move this to the next meeting. The court reporter is still working on it.
Is that from 2 months ago?
January.
And don't they normally have it by now?
Yes, they always have it by now.
Okay, we'll move on to license approval.
Mr. Chairman, I think they wanted to go ahead. Can we go out of order and let the Assistant Commissioner go ahead? Is that?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Thank you, Chair. Board, we wanted to come before you today. I'm Assistant Commissioner Brian McCormack, and I have Rachel Powers, who's the Program Policy Director for the department. And so what I wanted to talk about was we wanted to kind of come before you today and discuss the Go Build bill. I know that you all have discussed with you before. I think the information's been presented to you previously about this position. This proposed piece of legislation, and the reason we want to come to you is this is going to have a significant financial impact on the board, on your reserves, and so we wanted to come ask from our perspective as a department to know where the board stands on this piece of legislation. I think it's important that you take a position in relation to it so we can best represent your interest in relation to this, and so we're glad to kind of talk about details related to that or any questions that you all may have.
This was the one to do outreach for the associations to get people involved in the construction industry. Is that basically it?
That's generally what the program would do, yes.
I'll tell you what I said last time about this, and I don't know if you read the transcript. Well, we don't have a transcript, so you couldn't. One member of this board, and the board generally, has argued for a long time for a continuing education program for our contractors. Benefit to them and to the public. One of us, myself especially, has argued for a long time for more investment in outreach to the public to warn them about unlicensed contractors and unethical practices. We just went through a terrible ice storm. The door knockers are out there robbing elderly people and people of less sophistication, and then frankly everybody else too. And we could do a lot of good by spending a lot of effort and even money on warning the public about and telling them how to find out if someone's who's licensed or not and whether they have complaints or not. We are suffering from a lack of inspectors, which would also impact the public. And this program, while I'm not necessarily opposed to it on the face of it, to take our reserves and do what in some ways seems like a public relations effort for some associations is not the best use of our reserves. It is not the best way to protect the public. This is a consumer protection agency in so many ways. And it just seems to me that this is just a bad misuse not a misuse, that's not wrong, because it's not a bad program. I don't want to say that it's a bad thing to do. If we had unlimited funds, which nobody in government has unlimited funds, we could do that. But all three of the things I just mentioned, it seems to me, ought to be a higher priority than this particular piece of legislation.
Some astounding number, like $1 million?
Yes, it was, about, it was, 1.1 million. The original, bill did say per year.
I
to
think
take
the
50%.
legislation is at 50%.
Actually, it's currently drafted to take 50% of the current reserves, so that's 1.7 million, and then 80% of your net that you put in reserves every year.
Chairman, I personally, I don't see how in the world I could be for this, as stated, because it would deplete our funds. We have no control over the amount or where it's going. I think I would make a motion that we would not be in favor of this legislation.
Second.
Discussion.
Has the governor taken a position on it?
I'm not aware
Not
that
aware.
there's been a position taken.
I agree with Bill that it may be a good program, and it may be worthwhile for the state to try and do something with this program, but I don't see that the licensing.
As I recall, too, the legislation said that we were supposed to draw up rules, but they had to be approved by the associations, which basically meant we had no control. I found that an objectionable provision, even if it were to pass.
I would agree with that last statement. It's just beyond my comprehension why we would take licensed dollars and just arbitrarily give them away. Not that the program is not good. I, for one, think it's probably a very, very worthwhile program. But I don't think that the licensed dollars are the best way to fund it. And if it were to, on some smaller scale, come through and say, make it something more acceptable, I still think the board needs final decision over expenditures, where it's going, who it's going to, and why it's going. If not, then I wouldn't be for it at all. So that's the way I feel.
Program, because being in a construction business, there's a great number of our employees are north of 50, and it's hard to get the younger people interested in that. You know, it's hot and sweaty. That being said, we have a motion and a second. We'll do a roll call, beginning with Randy on my left.
About the name and, okay. Bill Mason,
Yes.
Keith Whittington,
Yes.
Motion was that this board did not endorse this particular piece of legislation.
Yes is to not endorse it, correct?
Yes.
Okay, yes.
okay. See, Mark Brudd. Yes. Reese Smith,
Yes.
Randy Chase,
Yes.
and Jerry Hayes. Okay.
Mr. Chairman, Good morning. I'm Bill Giannini. I'm the Deputy Commissioner of Commerce and Insurance. I did want to ask, just to clarify from the board, because this piece of legislation is moving through. Would the board be receptive to the department if we're presented with a compromise at some point, or some very small portion of your reserve dollars at the end of each year via vote of the board be devoted to an educational program? Would the board be in favor of some sort of compromise along those lines? I think that's what I heard, Commissioner
I
Whittington.
think the board would be in favor of some sort of compromise, but not.
And at the board's
what I'm-
discretion?
Yeah, but what I'm hearing is they don't want to give them the whole cake.
Yes, sir. Okay, that's what I thought I heard there. I just wanted to be sure, and we will get put in a position to ask what you would do rather than what you won't do. And I think, from what I've heard,
Are there any preliminary discussions or anything of that nature?
it has been fairly matter of fact up to this point, that there's not been much room negotiating on either side, and it became so contentious that we felt like we needed to know what the board's position was. I think actually probably through your current statute, you have the authority to budget and devote a small or a percentage of your revenues towards educational outreach. We have other board architects and engineers pass along a grant via vote of the board each year that goes to universities that have an architects and engineers program, and they use that money to buy equipment. So I think with the current, based on what you've said and what the wishes of the board are, and what Mr. Mason said as well, is that you would like to see some effort toward the advancing of the profession and the education, but not at this kind of massive volume, and remain the discretionary via the board vote at the end of each year based on your financial performance. I'm seeing a lot of nodding heads yes. Is that a fair assessment? Okay. Great. Well, I appreciate you all.
It not, at some point in time, when the budget gets really tight, they could sweep our excess money into the general fund and not really.
Yes.
Not really come by for a howdy-do.
They absolutely can, and I think as we've talked about as a board previously, and we certainly always want to be considering whether we reduce licensing fees. I know you all did reduce a licensing fee the past year. Those are the kinds of responsible things with your licensees' money that we like to see. Certainly, some very small piece of it going towards education and advancing the profession is a good use of that money. But this 80% without leaving discretion for the board, we all know, we've all lived through, certainly you guys know more than anybody, what sort of challenges you can face in a bad economy, and nobody has a crystal ball and knows what may be coming down the pike. And I think it's always important that the board have the ability to determine what it does with its money. So, and I would ask your legal counsel to research and confirm what I suspect is that you do have the authority now to devote some piece of your revenue toward education.
Do we have the authority to devote it toward public education along the lines of what I was talking about before, or continuing education?
Outreach, sure. I think you do. I'm not an attorney. I know you all.
Well, if the sponsor was willing to take this off notice and we agreed to consider a program through our own authority, do you think you can't speak for the take to him as a suggestion?
I think that would be a good faith effort toward, obviously, I don't think anybody in the equation, that doesn't sound like from hearing you all talk, is against the idea and theory of devoting some reasonable piece of your revenue to a beneficial initiative. So we can certainly pass that along. And as the Assistant Commissioner said, we want to make sure that we are talking about your wishes. And when we're over there in the plaza, that we are representing you accurately, not a little less or a little more, but accurately.
Well, if that's the case, then in 2 months when we convene again, depending on if say what has happened, he's taken it off notice, I'd be willing to bring a motion for us to consider a program along our own lines, in conjunction with some of the other things I always talked about as well, maybe some use of our reserves in a way that's beneficial in a lot of different areas.
I think you absolutely are afforded that authority via current statute. I don't even think you need new legislation for that, but certainly legal counsel can confirm that for you. So,
One last parting shot. I say take a number, because I've been in after continuing education for about 12 years now. I want to stay after continuing education. I think that that's utmost and foremost with our licensed dollars would be the best money spent, is to help continuing education of our currently licensed contractors, to keep them up to date and operating smoothly. I think it will help overall. Second of all is program number 2, and that's educating the public. That's what our charge is to protect the health, safety, and welfare of the public. And there's not enough being done with our money, and I think we need to change that. And maybe we can change that in 2 months. But storm season is upon us, and we're going to have another round of scrupulous contractors going out, and the board needs to quit sitting back and watching it happen. We need to move forward with something educational. Then I believe the third program could come into play as far as the board would be concerned, if there's anything left. But, you know, we need to be careful and responsible with what we do.
Could we ask your communications person in the department to come talk to the board in 2 months about what we can do about public education?
absolutely, we can.
And that would be, I'd like to hear from that person.
You sure can. Make sure that happens, and we appreciate your time and your clarity, and we will certainly pass along your wishes about continuing education. As we're having these discussions about this bill, we will be certainly in rooms with the lobbyists for the associations, and we'll make sure that that is heard. So, all right, thank you all. Sorry to interrupt.
Problem. Start with you, Bill.
Are we doing interviews? Or what are we doing?
Yes.
Okay. Well, I have one interview that I want to bring to the attention. It was 8031 Home Improvement Double D Trucking. And he came in, had done some jobs in Shelby County over the limit, trying now to get his home improvement license. The same old story in Shelby County, where he wasn't told by the county licensing authority he needed a license. He agreed to pay a $250 civil penalty, and then we can approve the license. So that's my recommendation on that particular one.
I have two. The first one is applicant for a BCA and a CE license. It expired in 2003. He actually stated on a handwritten note that since 2003 he had purchased and remodeled several homes for rental property, and that he had also built some apartments. Older gentleman claimed ignorance. He's wanting to reinstate the license, but I told him I needed new test scores. He agreed to retest, and he's also agreed to a civil penalty of $500 for contracting without a license, and I moved to approve that agreement and only issue upon test scores being presented. The next one I have is a home improvement. It's license number 8009, and this gentleman had a felony. It was a homicide. Without getting into a whole lot of particulars, this was nearly 20 years ago. He served his time. He has changed his life. He's going to church. He actually had a letter of recommendation from his pastor. And actually, he had TVI do a checklist on him, and it's been so long ago, it didn't come up. The felony didn't show up on him. I think this is the one. But at any rate, I move to approve the home improvement license of number 8009.
I have one, it's a home improvement. It's a felony, goes back to 1997. Alcohol, it took him to do this, but it apparently was quite a bit. He scaled the wall at a place in Gatlinburg and got into the room above himself, and course of the evening, what seems like a good idea sometimes becomes a bad. Anyway, he's been off probation since '02. He's had his voting rights restored, and I recommend his.
Randy and I interviewed this gentleman. It's a reciprocating license from state of Mississippi, about a 20 or 30-year-old company there, brother, sister, and dad, primarily electrical, $1.5 million. He has a felony since date of conviction was '02. He is off probation for 3 years. He went to federal boot camp for 6 months. I think Randy and I both changed in a family business, and we would approval of this license number 68664.
Chairman, I make a motion we accept the recommendations of the board members on the interviewed candidates.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to accept the recommendation of the board member interviewed. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? I believe the ayes have it.
Chairman, I make a motion we accept the waive applicants.
Second.
Have a motion and a second to accept the waived applicants. All in favor say aye.
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 Opposed? Ayes have it. Next, we have the revision.
Move to accept the revisions.
Second.
Have a motion and a second to accept the revisions. Favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Ayes have it. The LLEs,
I reviewed them. I have 3 that I wanted to bring before the board. One is license number 46791. He applied for his license, and Cindy reviewed it at the last meeting and asked for additional information. Sent in additional information. One is a reference letter from an inspector, state electrical inspector in Talbot, Tennessee, recommending approval. The other thing that he has sent in was that he listed an individual home in the year 20, which I don't know what that is, 2000 something. $4,000, said he wired the entrance and the whole house. That's the only experience that he listed. License expired a couple of years ago, and he's now wanting to renew it. And I'm at this point. Then there is another one, it's license number 52594. It's in the name of Samuel Swanson. There is a friend of Samuel Swanson, Rick Beauchamp, who says that he asked Samuel to renew his license for him, and renewed it a couple of times apparently. As far as I know, the license is always in Samuel Swanson's name, and this other guy working off of that license. But anyway, Samuel Swanson is retiring, and this guy wants to now renew what he thinks is his license. But the third one is a felony. Was arrested back in 2005. He's on probation until 2017. I think he served some time. He has recently gone to school at Tech, supposedly on the honor roll, has about 25 character recommendations in here for a license. Felony had to do with meth, manufacturing meth. Waited until he goes off probation to issue him a license, but since he's got all these character references in here, he's got a good reference from the college. I guess I wanted to bring it before the license number 60927. It's Jason Pendergrass from 2017, June 22nd.
How long has he been out of prison? Does it say?
Released to supervision on June 23rd, 2014.
So he's on supervised probation now.
Been clean since he's been released. He passes drug screens regularly. I think I'd recommend that we deny it, but
I move that we accept the recommendations, the denial on those three, and then whatever the recommendation was on the remainder on the
remainder was approval, and
approval on the remainder of LLEs.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion to approve the recommendation of the board member. All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Ayes have it. Have the LLPs. Not any LLPs, okay. Legal report.
All right, thank you, Chairman. I'm just going to read the recommended changes made by the board and their authorizations, starting with case number ending, 2014-021561.
Tell us what number it is on the report.
That would be number 4. The board decision was issue a letter of warning. The next change is case number 11 ending in 2061. Board recommendation was to accept council's recommendation of authorized formal and send a voluntary revocation consent order for failing to notify the board and not being truthful on renewal forms, in addition to poor business practices as it relates to contracting, plus a $5,000 civil penalty on a consent order.
What number?
That was number 11, ending 2061. Next one is number 12, ending in 1551 and 2. Board recommendation was to authorize formal and send a consent order with a civil penalty in the amount of $5,000 for unlicensed contracting activity. Board voted to approve council's recommendation on number 14, ending in 5211, but also made a recommendation that staff review the file, possibly for lowering their monetary limit. Next change, I believe, was number 23, and I think some of the numbers got off due to my automatic numbering in Word, so for clarification, that's complaint number ending in 1321 and 2. Board decision there was a letter of warning. And number 24, ending in 31491, board decision was also letter of warning. And on 33 on my report, 34 on the boards, ending in 9631, recommendation by the board was to send voluntary revocation consent order due to respondents' failure to pay 2 civil judgments issued against it. One was in the amount of what appears to be $56,697, and one was in the amount of over $162,000. Number 42 on my report, ending in 0441. Board's recommendation was authorize formal and send a consent order with civil penalty in the amount of $5,000 for unlicensed activity. Number 43 on my report, ending 0741. Board recommendation was to send a letter of warning to respondent for possibly bidding over his $25,000 home improvement limit. Number 7, under commercial, 0061. Board recommendation is to dismiss, as the complaint was open simply for him disclosing a divorce judgment in 2014. Didn't have anything to do with the contracting business. Number 8, ending in 0781 on commercial. Board decision was to authorize formal and send a consent order with a civil penalty in the amount of $5,000 for respondent exceeding his monetary limit and failing to disclose this to the prime contractors bidding on jobs, causing them to be disqualified from resubmitting a bid on that job. And on the represented cases, board agreed with council's recommendation on case number 2 here, which is 041 and 2, but also made and my recommendation was to close as they have already voluntarily given up their license. But also board made recommendation to refer to DA for possible criminal prosecution. Case number 3 under represents ending in 5031. Board's decision was to authorize formal and send a consent order in the amount of $2,000. Number 5 under represents ending in 6651. Board decision was to issue a letter of warning in this matter. Number 8 on represents ending in 4971 and 2. Recommendation was to lower the civil penalty from $5,000 to $1,000, but the board feels that this respondent has been licensed, or I'm sorry, has been in business for over 18 years and should know that a license is required on jobs exceeding $25,000. Therefore, the board's decision was to authorize formal and send a consent order with civil penalty in the amount of $5,000, plus a letter of warning regarding the necessity of a home improvement contractor's license in those counties requiring one for work performed over the $3,000 limit. Complaint number 10, ending in 3431. Council's recommendation was for consent order for voluntary revocation. The board wants to authorize an emergency hearing for suspension of this license and leading up to revocation. And I'm going to check into that one.
There's a question on whether he's still licensed or
Right,
not.
depending
You
on
don't
his
know that.
license status, and I will see if he is still licensed. We'll try to schedule that emergency hearing, and if he's not licensed, then I'll probably end up representing it to the board at the next meeting and getting additional authority on how to proceed. And the board was okay on number 11 on represents ending in 11761 and 0411 for closing and flagging that matter. And there was one final represent, case number 2012-014921 and 2. And the recommendation on this was to close and flag, and the board is okay with that. And that concludes my legal report.
Move to accept as amended.
Second.
All those in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Ayes have it. Okay.
Maybe I've already heard about the Go Build Act. So we'll go on the citation bill. It looks like it's moving on. The only thing they're questioning is why we haven't issued citations since 2006, because we currently have it in the law, but we just don't have it where you can close it without a formal hearing. So right now the committees are still meeting about that, but it does look like it's passing. On the LLE and the LLP, the combined bill, it looks like it's also moving through and passing. And there's one up there regarding the local licensing. I don't have a status on it. It's hard to figure out what's going on with it. I didn't know if any of you all had heard anything from your associations or anything, but this is where those with the CE license would have to, or I guess the new ones would have to get a license with the county. So I don't know what the status of that is right now, but it looks like it's still moving. And then the last one, the home improvement roofing bill, it looks like they're going to not go ahead and take this off notice. So right now, it doesn't look like it's gonna be passed this year, and that they're gonna study it for next year. I'll try to get an update on the county one, and I'll try to email something when I can find out more information.
Up would be budget update.
I think I put a copy for everybody, and this is a copy of sort of what I sent out to all of you yesterday. It was late, though. But based on our figures, we are, with all the LLP and the LLE, all that revenue, we're close now to, our total is 6.5 million is what we have so far.
What we have so far where?
Oh, in total revenue. The, on your first page where it says contractors, January 2015, it's, the total revenue collected up to this, up until January is 1.2 million. So, I just added this to the reserve. Of course, this will take, probably half of that will go to expenditures at the end of the year, but this is just based on the total revenue that we have collected so far. LLP, we've collected like 15,000 this year. They're on a 2-year cycle, so theirs is less. LLEs, we've collected 410,000 this year. And then, so, based on last year's reserve amount and these totals, this does not include all the expenditures for the years. Right. No, it's just an update. Josh and I were going to see if we could both go to the NASCLA meeting. It's going to be in August in San Diego. And it usually costs on out-of-state trips close to $2,000 for each person. So I just needed to get you all's approval for us to attend. And if a board member or any board member that wants to attend may also do so.
Trip.
Second.
I have one question. That has, the state does not have a travel freeze or anything like that going on? Okay.
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Ayes have it.
And that's pretty much last. Just to let you know, next board meeting will be May 19th in Jackson. And then be sure to hold your calendar for June 5th for a formal hearing.
Where would that be?
It's going to be here in Nashville.
At what time?
It'll be 9 o'clock in the morning. And I think, Mark, you had a conflict when we first checked the dates.
Checking that right now.
Friday, correct?
Yeah.
Sure.
Before you stand up and talk, we've already discussed Go Build, and it might benefit from what the board decided. The commissioners, the deputy commissioner, pretty much it's the will of the board that they were in favor of negotiating and doing something, but I could have probably saved you this trip. Is that pretty much where we are on it? They came to the board looking for direction, and that's kind of where the allow them to negotiate with the revenue side of that, and then that there are just a lot of things that other members of the board would like to use some of that money. Something more comprehensive as far as that expenditure. Your turn.
Obviously, we've had discussions. We met this morning, Representative Williams and the Deputy Commissioner and the liaisons met. And again, the discussion has been, I'm sorry, Kent Starwalt Tennessee Road Builders Association. The discussion has been obviously about the percent. I think that's where we are, and I assume that's what we're talking about with regard to how much of your all's revenue may or may not go into Go Build. And so we know that that's sort of been the sticking point, and that was what the discussion was this morning with them as well. First of all, I can assure you there has never been any attempt to cause your budget to go negative. That was never our intention. It was simply to use this fee paid by the industry to go back and support the industry, and that's what our intent was, and will continue to be. So we look forward to working with the folks at Commerce Insurance to see if we can still craft something that we can go forward this year, and if we need to study it a little longer, then we'll study it a little longer. But we'll see what we can work out with them, and so I appreciate the opportunity to walk down the hill and give you a brief update. Thanks.
Mr. Chairman, I'm sorry. I know I'm a little out of order. I just had one matter on the legal report that I'd like some clarification on, and it's a residential matter. So I didn't know if we could bring the residential subcommittee back together real quick just for me to get some authorization, and then I'll present that.
Bring it to the whole board.
Okay, that's fine. This matter, and it's number 3 on your legal report under residential, ending in 2161 and 2. We have 2 open complaints against this individual, this one being before you for the first time today. And you're okay with going forward with the consent order civil penalty in the amount of $5,000 due to the gross negligence and incompetence. And I do think we have the engineering reports and evidence to go forward on that. Our inspector too, but we also have another engineering report that was done that I think backs up our inspector. But regardless, this matter has been presented to you for this respondent to receive a voluntary revocation consent order, which went out on the other open complaint from the last meeting. Basically, he's built 2 houses in the same neighborhood with a lot of the same problems, but he has entered into a tentative agreement with both of the complainants, both in this matter and the matter that the board heard at the last meeting, to buy back the houses from the complainants and essentially make them whole because they had a civil suit ongoing. My question to the board now is basically a representment issue on the one where the board has authorized the voluntary revocation. Would the board be interested, in light of the new facts that he has repurchased the homes from the complainants and is in the midst of settling the civil matter, would you be interested in going back from the voluntary revocation consent order and to be in line with this case, send another $5,000 consent order on that case? Because
Doesn't need to be building houses to me.
well, I think that the issue was that he's used a new subcontractor on these two houses, and he's not going to be using them going forward. And he has
He blames all his problems on a subcontractor, and yet he's buying back the house.
he's buying back these two houses that were
How
the
many houses
complainants.
did he build?
I think that he's built quite a few. I think I don't know how many.
42 houses.
I don't know how many this year. I think he's pulled like
So are you
400.
saying not to do the revocation of the license, but do a $10,000?
Well, it would be a total 10,000. It would be 5,000 for this one, and then
Correct.
5,000 for the other one. Yes, sir.
I'd be in favor of that if we can get proper certification.
Right. And I told him when he called and said that it was in the works and that they had a tentative closing date of, I think, April 15th. I said that, I would take it back to you all and get approval, but I thought that you might be interested in knowing when it's actually resolved.
He says he wants certification that it's
Right.
been settled
And,
that way.
and I agree, and I think, I can hold off on sending that consent order pending his proof that everything's been settled with these homeowners.
If we don't get the proof, then the voluntary revocation still stands. But I would be in favor of going ahead and doing the other 5,000, even with revocation, if we don't get that proof.
I'd like to see something other than the no good home builder telling us that. I would like to see something from the client, from the customer, that they didn't have to forgive him forever and forever, amen, but just we have settled with our builder and no
Right.
longer own the residence at 123.
Right.
So what you're saying, Keith, is that we go back and give $5,000 on the first one anyway,
Yes.
and keep the voluntary revocation as an option until unless we get that
The proof that
the
Reese
proof
wants.
that Reese wants.
And
Okay.
then another 5,000 for the other,
Yeah.
Right.
other.
So essentially table that representment and just let the voluntary revocation consent order sit there until we get proof
No,
and then send this
no,
5K.
he says, Keith suggested we go ahead and you represented, the representment means there's a $5,000 civil penalty on the first one,
Right.
as well as this one.
Mm-hmm.
And then put the revocation on hold until we get Reese's proof.
You know what price these houses were?
Not directly in front of me. I think they were around I want to say around the 200,000, 250 range, maybe.
Go for it. 10,000 is pretty tough on it, or 5,000 on it.
That's to buy it back. That's pretty bad stuff.
Both of them. 5,000.
Well, the engine, I think that the evidence against him was,
Go for it. Yeah.
okay.
Yeah.
I think it substantiates the penalty. Okay. Thank you.
Until our next meeting in May. See you in Jackson.
Got a one-day meeting in Jackson.
You gotta be good.